Thanks, Olga, for taking care of the introductions. I'll not make sure no one's sleeping. Yeah, so I'm Sri Timraju, Senior Systems Engineer with AutoZone. For those of you who want to know more about AutoZone, we are a leading retailer and leader of the market distributor of replacement parts after industries. And we've been doing this for the last 43 years. And then the place where I come from within AutoZone is called Platform Engineering or the Site Reliability Engineering, the SRE umbrella. And then we take care of a broader spectrum of tools. And whatever we do in AutoZone, we always try to think about customer first mentality. And that stands as a pledge and values as you see here. So whichever tool we pick, whichever offering we try to make sure we see that from shoes of a customer to see how that translates. And then my talk today is going to be probably on the same lines to see what was the use case that we had initially, and then how did we build that, and then all those good, bad, ugly scenarios probably, and then any new features that we implemented, or the future roadmap of what we want to do and where we want to go in terms of choosing Elastic. So the basic use case starts with AutoZone had little over 6,000 stores within the country, and then there are mostly non-legacy or maybe mostly legacy apps to most extent. So we do not have a unified pane of glass to watch what our transactions from stores are looking like. And we do not have a single view of metrics. And there are all 6,000 individual stores with the store server sitting on each store and then syncing the data once in a night to the data center back in Memphis. So for the business to take decisions based on this scenario might not be a fun part to deal with, especially when we're in a competing market like this. We were given a chance to try something out new, and then we were looking out for products, and then we had 3 or 4 major requirements that we want to meet. Something like a tool with good community support to start with, and open source primarily. We don't want to invest dollar right away. I mean, business doesn't give me money just for the fun of trying few tools. So I'll have to prove it first. So we want to start with a POC or an open source thing. At the same time, we don't want to be the one who are creating the knives and swords. We wanted to have some community support. If at all we are stuck somewhere, we need someone to go fall back with. And with all those scenarios, we have Elastic, and then we started Elastic as the first POC. We did not do any POCs later on, and that's why I'm here. And then to start with, we were a 2-member team to start with. We have the tiniest team, and we had 0 experience of what Elastic means. All that we know was 3 key terms, ELK. And then we started, honestly, with the Google GitHub examples of how to build a system in terms of ingesting data. We were learning all the moving parts, all the Lego parts behind the scenes. And then we came up with a basic architecture of 3 data, 1 Logstash, 1 Kibana to start with to see how this thing translates, if this ever really works or not. I mean, we did not have backup from the Wintel team as well. They did not give us a good enough of VMs. They said, we only give you 5 VMs to start with. Prove this if it ever works or not. So with that sort of mindset, we started picking up few stores from AutoZone. We don't want to impact all 7,000 stores at once because our systems are not scalable that long. So we picked few non-critical applications on stores and then started ingesting data onto Elastic. And then we started to pick few use cases on stores. And then once everything's working, we thought, yes, it's all working. The data is all there, but it's not in a format that we wanted it to be. It's all unstructured data. It all thrown up as one stack trace in message field, which no one could read or make sense of. And then we had to learn something called Grok. And until that point in my life, I never heard this word. So I had to rely on the Grok debugger, the painless beta versions on open source, and then figuring out what does this Grok even means. And then we came up with some basic parsing filters that make sense, trying few examples. And then over few iterations, to be honest, it's not an overnight thing. It took at least few weeks for us to figure out what data do we need out of that big stack trace. And then we chopped off all the unnecessary chunk. And then we came out with some meaningful dashboards to start with. So the dashboard you see there is from our Cloud Foundry application. So we have roughly 7,000 stores, and then we had some Pivotal Cloud Foundry is a tool that we use to manage the SaaS version of tools. So that Cloud Foundry is also a different system where it spits out logs as Firehouse without even caring about where the logs are going. So we do not have a single pane to understand what that thing is doing. And once we have Elastic hooked up, we got some meaningful dashboards of what an app is doing in terms of how many logs per minute is it throwing out. Do we really need that or not? So once all of this started to work, people liked it a lot within AutoZone, and we thought, let's ingest more. We wanted to onboard or do what you call a stress test on this to see how large could we scale this up. And then we picked all the possible beats in the world, one from file beat, one from metric beat, one in just source per beat type, and then metrics from APM, and then uptime from BCF. And then we started hitting Elastic from all directions. And guess what? Cluster is no more happy because it's not scaled out to take that much of load. And to start with, like any other traditional administrator would think, let's vertically and horizontally scale this thing. So we did put more RAM, more CPU on all those nodes, and we thought that should work for a while. It did work for a while, to be honest. But what happens is when we are in this process, it's almost 6 to 1 year time frame. And then all the people started thinking this as a prod data. Then they started taking metrics out of it. They said, my Kibana is taking forever to load. Wait, we did not build an enterprise system yet. It's a POC, and we're not ready for opening gates. And that's not what business wants, right? I mean, until the point where they figure out things are working, they start expecting it to work around the clock, 24/7, as if we are running on AWS or something like that. And then we had to reach to Elastic saying, guys, we need your help. We're in a place where we build something, but it's not scalable for us. People are relying on it, but it's not standing good enough. And then it's no more a POC. We had mission critical data, and we can't afford to lose data at that point. And then Elastic said, yes, we have a solution. It's called ECE. Try that. So that brought new play into the game. So we had to figure out what hot, cold, and warm allocators mean, because our VMs are not catered to that sort of a structure. And I probably missed a point in between that. Whatever we do in AutoZone, being an SRE guys, we wanted it to be automated. We had Ansible, we had Concourse, or choice of our CI/CD, and ECE is not so compatible with Concourse and Ansible at that point. Or maybe we are not fluent in making both of them work. So we had to rewrite all of our code or pipelines that we built from an open source system. But ECE gave us a good play to start with. I mean, it scaled our environment. We got a lot of community support from AutoZone. We got a lot of more people using our platform at a place where it was so good enough, but it's not really that good enough because we had to deal with ECE upgrades now. So the ECE itself had a script to upgrade those deployments, and we are an air-gapped environment, which means we don't want our private subnets to talk to internet directly. We'll have to figure out to download that script and then put across all of those nodes. Clicking of a button is much easier than figuring out all of these moving parts in an air-gapped environment. And then we often had issues with our RAID disks. We did not realize that frozen tire was so easy to work with. I mean, it's happy to push the data off the frozen or cold tire, but when it's panicking a lot, we used to have this yellow warnings every often, sort of mayday situations. So ECE was good. It's not that ECE is bad, but it's not the way that we wanted to work. We wanted something else more. And then if you all remember, at least we had this situation of dealing with deployment templates on ECE. Whenever we had to scale up a deployment, we had to edit that deployment template, and it only works using an API or Postman because it's not dynamically clickable on the UI at that point. Things may have changed as of now. Sorry if I'm over talking or underthinking, but yeah. And then we again asked Elastic, guys, we need something else. It's not serving our purpose. And then they said, there is one more thing left called Elastic Cloud. Jump on there, and then all of your problems should be gone. And that's the best decision we have ever taken. I mean, we have never looked back from then. So the reason I said that was until that point, we have roughly terabytes of data coming into the system, but it's only one environment. We do not have room or bandwidth to have a 3-tier system of Elastic. If I had to do an upgrade on Elastic, I'm just upgrading prod. I don't know if it ever works or not. So going on from ECE to Elastic Cloud gave us that flexibility wherein I could only pay for the resources when I was required, and then scaling up, scaling down deployments, and then all those searchable snapshots and beautiful things that come up off the box without having to pay anything additional thing. And that thing definitely helped us. So we were able to have a dedicated deployment for monitoring, dedicated deployment for our SIM security data, and dedicated deployments for our regular Cloud Foundry and store data. So we're having 9 deployments as we speak. Everything's running on GCP as a SaaS offering, and then things were so good. And that gave us some flexibility and room to play with the new features. Until then, we're in a place where we're trying to fight fires, but we're not making use of the stack the way we're supposed to. And that gave us some breathing room to focus on more features. So the first thing we picked up was machine learning, because that's the place where market is going. And to be honest, we had zero experience of what machine learning means. We know that it does something, but we have to figure it out again. So we divided a subset of a group, and we focused a bit more on machine learning, picked up few use cases. And then we built a system that is sort of a stopgap environment, because not all developers or end users are so fluent on machine learning to figure out to create a job by themselves. And then we don't want someone to have a bad customer experience, because what AutoZone, when we all care about is customer experience. So we had a solution interim in between, saying that let's have some app or some front-end page that sits in between user and Elastic. It takes all the requests from the user through HTML page. It's a Python-backed app, and then it sits on Cloud Foundry. It then converts all of those user requests into a JSON and then uses machine learning API to ingest it back to the Elastic. So the next slide, this is probably high-level diagram, which is not that self-explanatory, but I'll try to make it a bit easier. So we had that machine learning API sitting in between, taking the user requests, and then converting it back to a JSON, and then ingesting to Elastic, and then doing the regular stuff of alerting and all of stuff out of the box. So this is the page that it looks like. So we built this in an internal tool. We had Micro Focus tool that we use for our change management. We thought that's broadly used. We made use of that to come up with a page and then encapsulate all of the heavy moving parts behind machine learning, just to make this offering more public within AutoZone, so that everybody want to make use of this. At the same time, we wanted to have some track of who's creating a job, and if at all it fails, we need to have a place where to figure out what went wrong. Unlike opening a Kibana and then creating a job, it doesn't often tell us what went wrong if at all it has to. So once we have this sort of setup in place, we were able to pick up a use case, a basic use case, and then came up with some beautiful metrics in terms of machine learning. So this app is a Cloud Foundry application. It's an AutoZone application that sits in our PCF environment. And then developers often, we had a known problem there. So for example, if some incident has to happen, developers are the first guys who wanted to ask, give me a debug mode of my app. I want to see every small thing what's happening. And they often forget to turn it off. And we had roughly 3,000 applications on Cloud Foundry, and we do not have a single place to figure out which app was causing all of this panic around. So we built this machine learning around Cloud Foundry application, and it keeps track of all the different levels of application logs, info, debug, and error, whatever. And then it tries to put a graph saying, based on each app, what is that app doing in terms of writing into disk? How many error logs are written versus info logs, just so we know at least a place to go and stop that guy from writing everything in debug mode on a prod environment. So once we have all of this basic machine learning stuff, our story was much happier. We got what we need. And then in terms of next level, yeah, I would say we all lived happily ever after, because our basic encapsulation of hardware is gone. We could scale up, scale down. We're starting investing time on features. We're less worried about deployment. We're less worried about their infrastructure performances. And then this slide talks about, we also give funny names to each of our products. We call our basic cluster called Matlock. It's based on a theme series back in the US. I'm not so familiar, but AutoZone is so fond of picking names for each and every product we support. So Matlock is one of those primary Elastic clusters which houses all the logs from stores and Cloud Foundry environments. We're roughly talking around 3 terabytes of data per day in a prod environment coming from multitude of sources. And then we have traditional NOC and SOC guys who are watching glasses about applications going up and down. And we had a dashboard for them to talk about what's an app doing every second in terms of heartbeat data, to figure out if an app is down or up, rather than an user calling us. It's always better we call them and say, yes, we are aware of this, we're taking care, rather than being a prod incident. And then, as I said, we had Cloud Foundry. We built one more dashboard. And often people come to us say, I want my app to have 16 GB of RAM and 66 CPU or whatever CPU sizes. And it's very hard for us to defend saying, why do you need that thing in a world? Do you have proof on your level saying that, is your app really using it? And then it's a developer sentiment versus platform operator sentiment, saying whoever wins the battle wins. It's often developer who wins it because they had a business use case backing them. So this sort of dashboard gives us more flexibility in proving them your app never used less than 50% of what you're allocated. So don't talk about scaling it up. So this gave us some flexibility in cutting off infrastructure resources. So this ties back to our use case of saving money, right? So we don't want to scale up things for the fun of scaling them. So we had some systematic proof saying that, yes, this is what your app is doing, plan accordingly. And then we have one more dashboard. As I said, we have close to 7,000 stores within the country. And then we wanted a single view that talks about successful transactions in each store, and then what each store is doing. Unlike in traditional way, we don't have a single view of what each store is doing. We have to get a call from store manager saying, my thing is down, could you please help us? Versus now, it's sort of near real time. It's not real time. It's sort of near real time because we had Logstash in between. And when 7,000 stores started ingesting data through Logstash, through FileBeat, it had enough of CPU and RAM, but believe me, it takes a bit of delay before the actual timestamp and timestamp has to be so close. So we get at least a near real-time view of what an app inside a store and how many successful transactions are being performed at what level. And so the business could take a decision on what parts are being sold, and if so, what are the failed transactions in some of those business use cases. And then in terms of metric beat, we had API gateway, as everybody would have, an internal API gateway which communicates between all of those systems internally to AutoZone. And then that often used to give some trouble. We do not have an enterprise level monitoring solution. So we're using APM to do that. And then we started hooking up metric bit data to see how it starts with. And then API gateway is not a Java-based app, unfortunately. So it has some restrictions between how much of data could we get out of it. So we at least started with metric bit to see what that API gateway is doing in terms of processing requests or taking data, or gateway latency time. Often developers used to complain, my app is taking forever, where the problem is lying. So we do not have a clear view where the request is being vanished in the deep space. So with API gateway metrics and then APM being hooked up, we know a clear stack trace or transactional trace of at what stage in the process the app is dying forever. So that way we could eliminate that to the most part. So these are the basic use cases that we have solved so far, and then I've been following the keynotes this morning, and we are so fond of that API ops and then data sampling and then data profiling. That caught my interest. As a long-term roadmap, we need to try some of those. And in futuristic roadmap perspective, we also wanted to try the fleet integrations because we have 7,000 stores having beats individual on each store, and then whatever tool of choice I might use, Ansible or Terraform, it's not fun to migrate or upgrade each of those individual agents, all of those configs, right? So we're trying to have that fleet set up across all of those stores. That way, click of a button should ideally do it. When I say ideally, it's ideally, so hope it does. And that's one of our long-term roadmap visions. And at AutoZone, we just don't work. We also try to find fun in whatever we do. So being a DevOps or SRE mindset guys, we had this ops stack for everything we do. Go-kart, boat, swag, lunch, whatever. So these are all between pre-pandemic, pandemic, and post-pandemic scenarios. So things might have been changed a lot, but the whole idea of being fun still remains same. So we're trying to find fun in whatever we do. So that almost concludes my stuff. And then I had to thank a lot of people for letting this happen. Now, first of all, Kevin Pons, our IT director, sort of a fearless guy, I would say. Someone has to be so fearless to bring an idea of open source into an enterprise and then letting them try and then converting that to a enterprise-grade solution. So, and then Abhishek Logishetty is our senior engineer who spent probably a lot of sleepless nights figuring out what all of this means a couple of years back. And then I was part of his sleepless nights as well to figure out what Grok means for the most part. And then the machine learning team who were so fond of figuring out an interim solution in between, encapsulating all of those heavy work lift of machine learning Kibana thing, and then building up a page on front of everything and then converting that to a JSON. So that's, in theory, it looks so awesome, but practicality, it had a lot of back and forths. And then obviously Elastic, I could not name them individually, but to start with Taylor Young and then Randy Ward, our CSM and managers, and then Todd Ferguson, to be honest with, he's a support guy. Without Todd's intervention, we'd have been at least 4 or 5 decades behind, I would say. So every small thing, he had a solution before we had a problem. So that's how Todd usually operates.